these homes get defamed. They've served their purpose, they've housed families, and all of a sudden there's a problem. And the only thing that's changed is someone's produced a paper report that says there's something wrong with this house. The house hasn't changed.
Being satisfied with the whole report is particularly important, because if that's the only one thing and you've quantified it, you've understand it.
We don't live in a country where our building standards are pretty high, but typically older properties are just built better.
Welcome to Perth Property Insider, where you will learn how to grow your wealth and improve your life using Perth property. Our show is brought to you by Investors Edge Real Estate, the highly rated and award-winning property management, sales and buyers agency servicing the whole of Perth. Now, here's your host, Jared Mann.
Hey, Paul, thanks for joining us today. Very excited to have you on the podcast. Been friends for a very long time and you've got a wealth of knowledge to share with us, so looking forward to diving in.
Yeah, it should be a bit of fun, Jared. Thanks for bringing me on board.
So tell us a bit about your background as an investor, first of all, because you're not just a building inspector, but you've been investing for a long time. And I think we were just chatting off air. You've got 15 odd properties now. So
yeah, I'd probably say that most of the investment hasn't worked that way. You go through the process of, and I know you're a big advocate of it, lack of strategy, I think, was a real issue where you just buy something and you buy something. And we did that. I mean, we bought our first investment property when we were 22 or 23, interest rates were 17%, it was like pretty bad, And so, yeah, and I think the one thing probably is I never sort of gave up on it as an investment class, and you hear that, you got friends that go, oh, I bought one and it was a 10, it was a 9, man, they're gone, And I went, oh, okay. I said, well, and so I'm sort of a really strong believer in, I just learn a bit and move on. And, eventually, if you do enough of it, you sort of might start to get it right, And so, yeah, so that was sort of the process, just looking at, learning from what's worked, what hasn't worked. I mean, we've done a whole range of subdivisions, this, that, and the other over the years, I don't know how many properties we've bought and sold and done stuff with. And so we've sort of, and it's, what I realise also, there's no one size fits all, it's like everyone's strategy is different, do you want to grow? I'm almost 60, so, I don't really need to build asset base, that's not really our focus. So, you do that for maybe when you're 30s and we're 40s and you go, okay, now how do I, make cash, I'm more interested in cash flow. I'm not interested. So I think the different stages where we're a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more trying to grow it quicker, taking a bit more risks, but, we keep our LVR now around 40% because that's where we want to be.
Tips it more towards cash flow, I guess, as well.
Yeah, more cash flow. I don't care about negative gearing because it all makes money now, so I don't have losses with it, so that's fine. So, and it's just the right fit for us at this stage of life. And, we've sort of been mixing it up a little bit by, we've rented our house out, we took off and I said to Rob, mate, we got this house. He's looking at me going, what? And I said, so we've started doing some short-term accommodation, there seems to be a ton of people coming from South America, particularly South America. So we've got a couple of properties that we went, the leases came to an end and let's just do the room by room, short term, and so they come in, they go 6 months, 12 months, we fully furnished them, did that routine. And so one property we were getting $550 a week and now we're getting $1,200 a week just by renting the 4 rooms out. I think we net about, after costs and stuff, because you've got, you're paying for power and phone and this, I think we're netting about $950 a week for it. Seems to be pretty good, So we did the same thing at our place. We've got.
We would have had your furniture there.
Yeah, we got our furniture there. And so we rented out 3 rooms. I think we're picking up, $750 or $800 a week. It's pretty bloody good, And so they're not, rental, a long term is, they're in, they're out. You got to move your furniture and this and that. So we just went, this zone's gone. We got a friend looking after the house. She moved into our space, and then we just rent out the rooms. So,
but just adapting things to your lifestyle and stage that you're at.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, I think that's probably the biggest takeaway that we sort of worked out is that, we're more in a lower risk, obviously.
And you've got your kids in the fold as well. So we often chat about, how you're bringing them into things.
Yeah, look, that's a really good point because they're fortunate, they're really good, and I'm really proud of the kids. And now Chris is actively involved in it. She works with Rob. Rob manages all the property. I don't get involved in it. So Rob's sort of the property. She loves property. So Chris has been working with her. So
of course, the shorter term stuff's a lot harder to manage if you don't have those skills and time. So
yeah, it is. So I think and they learn and we learn, and you look at you sort of worked out what's worked for you in the past. And so it's at a stage now where, it seems to be still really good opportunities in Perth. We've had property in Adelaide for years. It's done nothing. It was like, Adelaide. Now it's like, God, the increase is insane. Oh my God. We're talking about, I think, valuations of, almost twice, at least twice in less than 2 years.
I mean, that's why I'm so still bullish about Perth and where our potential upside will go to still. We're so undervalued. So.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think if I look at Perth at the moment, far out, like when people go, it's going to implode, I go, how's it implode? You've got constant growth of demand. The government's coming up with these crazy schemes around making it more difficult for investors, which is going to reduce stock. Like I don't know what these guys are on, but what we really need is obviously how do you attract more investors? Melbourne's been frigging around with this stuff to Dan Andrews. Everyone's like, I'm out of there. And so investors just put their hands up and leave.
Perth relatively is, a pretty decent option all round. Yeah.
And when you look at what you can buy, whether you want to do development or hold, we've got, it's still, it's still very, very, very attractive and I still think it's extremely affordable.
Well, our biggest challenge today, people can probably get an insight into why our lunches go for 4 hours when we catch up. So our biggest challenge today is keeping it to 30 or 40 minutes. No, that's all very interesting stuff.
That's the upshot of it, so yeah, that's good.
Tell us a bit about how you got into building inspections then, because I'm sure you didn't I know you had a few different previous lives in different industries, and I think you started your business around a similar time than I did. So we were going through that phase together.
It was 2009. Started the business in 2009, and there was no sexy vision. It was like, gee, I need to eat. It was pretty much, cause we got caught up in the whole, GFC thing, and we had a lot of developments going on at that time, and a lot of people we got caught up in that. And I just needed to find out what I can get into quickly. And I'd worked with someone doing house inspections about 10 years earlier as a contractor. I didn't really get involved in the business, but just executing some inspections. And so I thought, well, I can do that. It's not that hard, So I just started it, and so that was the basis of it, because it's a really good area. I found that there wasn't that sophisticated, and it was really interesting because there wasn't much aspiring stuff going on in Australia in our industry. It was like, it's all pretty dull, and so I really looked to America. When I started the business, I really, found some, there was some people over there that ran coaching clinics. It was a big thing, they call them home inspections in America. It was a big industry, so much more evolved. And so I looked at how they marketed, what they did, how they approached things differently. And so there was a lot of insights into that. And so then I guess what I didn't want to do was just do another service like everyone else. So I just wanted to sort of understand, where are the problems or what's not being done well. And so I went through a bit of a process and then just got off, and it just grew. So that was in 2009, and so it's just been over 14 years now.
Yeah, well, where are you at now?
I think we're up over 40. And I franchised the business after a year, and now we're national. I think we're probably the largest or second largest in the country. And, and I think we got 43 franchisees now around the country. We've done 80,000 plus inspections. And it was it's a running joke, Rob, my wife's dad always ribs me. He goes, because when he started, he goes, well, so what are you going to do? He says, I just want to do 17 inspections a month and then just spend some time with my kids. That was the plan. He goes, right, okay. And then he goes, so how many inspections a month are you doing now? I said, okay. Granted, it's a few more than 17 a month. He always has a laugh about that, because he sort of knew that, for me to get 17 and go, oh, that's it,
He knows you probably better than you know yourself.
Yeah. So it was interesting, but it's been interesting. Certainly seeing the differences. I think in a lot of industries, Australia, we've got quite different, buying processes in every state.
Yeah, you would have had to get your head around all of them, and
and this and that, and auctions and no auctions and that, this, that, and the bloody registration and licensing. It's literally like running a business in 6 countries. It's just bizarre. And for such a small population that we have, it was hard. In the early days, it was difficult because you're sort of trying to, not only the execution of inspections and what are we looking at and what changes.
Well, it's similar for real estate agents and property managers.
It would be.
See the different things when you rent out your properties in the other states. And it's an obstacle for me in my thinking to it's not just as easy as roll the exact same things out in every state. So
no, it takes time, and eventually, like, you sort of learn I think the bottom line, the fundamentals of the execution are the same. Yeah. We've never changed how we go about what we do with our inspection, how we train guys. The same process nationally. It's just a little bit maybe marketing and how you approach people, and some of the legislation around smoke alarms and this and that. It varies. Every state has their own legislation around all those sorts of particularly safety related issues. But yeah, once we sort of got our head around that, we found that the core requirement relating to checking a property out and making our clients feel comfortable.
It's universal, yeah. Well, you wrote a book called Don't Expect, Inspect. What inspired you to write that? Because there's a lot of good content in there, and I was kind of thinking, how interesting can building inspections be? But
not very interesting. Oh, no, don't get me wrong. It's important, but it's.
I'll tell you what, you cover a lot of interesting stuff in the book. So I was actually really surprised because it's eye-opening.
It was pretty interesting because what I found was there really wasn't anything that talked about inspections. There just was. I couldn't find. I was looking for books on it, and I found there wasn't a book. There was, and what I did before I wrote the book, I thought, does there need to be another book? Really? Like, seriously? There's no shortage of books in this world, So I've got a whole bunch of books that I found in the marketplace. Most of them were American books, and not really relevant to us, for a range of different reasons. And I thought it would just be really useful. And as building an inspection business, I just found that there was so much misinformation.
Well, the average buyer is just so uneducated, and this is from me wearing my hats as both the buyer's agent and the selling agent, and we perform both of those roles, and they very rarely ever, they don't even understand what they're reading when they get their building inspection reports. So it takes a lot of education from our side to have them actually be making informed decisions, and that's providing they even use a good inspector that is identifying these things. So
yeah, it's true. It is true. And I thought, well, it'd be good to, and I've sort of broken it down into the different sections that I thought were relevant and important. And it is a sort of book you can just pick it up and just, go to a section and go have a read of it. It's not like you got to read the whole thing of it. And it's just become a good reference tool, and so much of the stuff in there, we spent a lot of time training our franchisees around so they understand it, they communicate to clients. So a lot of it was about trying to share some information with clients, because we found that, like real estate agents or conveyancers or mortgage, they're providing advice to people relating to inspections, and they don't really know anything about it, and it's like, and I can just tell you story after story after story where people are freaking out about it. It's just crazy, But I think that was a motivation, and it's a resource, and we've gotten a lot. I don't know. I think I had 10,000 printed, and they're out there somewhere in the ether. I don't know where they are, but they've all gone out there somewhere. So
sitting on people's bookshelves, yeah.
Yeah, probably. I've got a couple of lines. Yeah, that's good. Mum, you give one to your mother. That's the biggest thing you do. You give a book to your mum. Your mum goes,
yeah, your own mum. Yeah, wow, my son's successful. He's written his book.
Oh, look at that. So there you go. If nothing else,
So what are some of the common misconceptions that property investors have, and how does your book address some of those, do you think?
Probably the thing that we find that seems to come up a lot is, the concept of, as part of a buying process, the idea that a lot of them think it's mandatory, right? Which is good for us, but it's not, and the motivations, a good thing that sort of an investor or someone purchasing property should understand is when someone's talking to you about getting an inspection done, or here's someone we know, what's their motivation? So are they genuinely interested, and let's just be blunt. I'm not saying this is the way it works, but, when there's a large commission attached to the sale of a property, inspectors can be seen as a problem, because, you can get an inspection report. There's a 3-page tick box thing that satisfies a requirement, and it's less likely to rock the boat. And unfortunately, generally the people that need more information and are less experienced are the ones where there can be blind spots with that. So it is, and look, we have many, obviously a lot of the work that we get is from real estate agents, that's where it comes from. But we are, and there's lots of real estate agents that just want to make sure their clients are well informed, make sure if there's any issues, it's identified.
Those of us that are, top performers, we want as smooth a process as possible. When we go to sell a property, we are happy to warrant that everything is working, and we're happy to get everything fixed and sorted before we go to market. But there's many others at the other end of the spectrum, I'm sure that.
Yeah, there is. And so that sort of, potentially being direct, you don't need to get this done, or that's not important, or just to get the structure. Often there's people we've done a lot of inspections, okay? We don't live in a country. The standards in Australia for building are incredibly high. And so I did an analysis at one point and looked at how many properties have serious structural issues, right? It's a very small percentage that have serious structural issues. And the ones that do, let's face it, how do I know? Like, if they're serious, I can get a 10-year-old walk out there and go, whoa, that looks like there's something wrong going, it doesn't lean like this, or there's a crack in the wall. Like, they're pretty obvious, and that's not typically, and often there's a big emphasis on the structure. And what we found from experience, and particularly when people have come back with us with concerns, it's all the other stuff, the electrics, the plumbing, there's issues with the drainage, there's something out the backyard that they've built that's not legit, there's all sorts of other issues. And they can be the things that...
The approvals is a big one, isn't it? It can drastically affect value.
Absolutely. And clients go, it's really funny, they go, I just want to know it's not going to fall down. I go, I can pretty much guarantee it's not going to fall down. It was the last time. Think about it. If a house fell down in Australia, it'd be on national news, wouldn't it? It's a common occurrence in some areas. You travel around, you go, more. But, that's ridiculous. I just want to know the house isn't going to fall down. I'm like, yeah, okay, well, you don't need to get an inspection for that, because the chances it's going to fall down. And then I think that's one thing, not really considering some of the other aspects of the property and the home, And so we do an inspection. We can go, just get the structure done if that's what you want to do. But for a marginal difference in cost, we do all the electrics and the plumbing.
Yeah, it's like people penny pinch to not have all these things identified at the beginning. And what I find as an investor, then I can plan out, okay, well, these things need to be done at the commencement before I place a tenant. I want to tackle those maintenance things, or I'm going to need this over the next 5 years. Like, you can sort of forward plan what you're going to need to fix or upgrade, or obviously it depends on your purpose for the property as well. You've mentioned you do some subdivision or development. If you're knocking the house down, well, you're not going to be as worried with some of these things, are you?
No, it is. And look, I think that's a really good point. It is about sharing information, not just things that, should I buy it or should I not? You should just aim, as someone buying property, you should just aim to be informed. As informed as you can be, you can decide what you want to do with that information, but be informed. Getting independent information about the property, so it gives you information about this, that, and all that sort of stuff. That's important. And then you can decide, I'm going to fix that. I don't want to buy it. I don't think, probably for us, a tragedy, and it's a tragedy, is when Someone's looked at a house, young couple looking at a house, agent's trying to sell it. Some inspector goes in, the whole thing doesn't comply with current code, blah, 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 comes up with a whole bunch of things, actually not true, not really an issue, not a major drama. And then the buyer doesn't buy it because they're freaked out. And so it hasn't served anyone. The seller wants to sell it. The buyer clearly wanted to buy the house because I put an offer in on it. I want to buy the house. And so then these parties go away, not buying the house I wanted to buy for reasons that actually aren't valid, and this happens all the time.
Well, some of them can be very scary too. I mean, I won't name names, but there's a lot of agents that don't want buyers to use a certain inspector because they classify non-painted tops of doors as being a major structural defect and things like this. Like, it makes people very scary when all the doors aren't painted on the tops.
It does, it does. And it's really interesting because I think, and that's probably one of the downsides of our industry is that, a lot of inspectors potentially go, look, we're here, we got to find stuff. We work for the seller. Actually, we don't. We work for everyone, and our job is to facilitate an informed process so that the buyer is actually informed and they have all the information on hand about it. And we're very conscious of not freaking people out.
And I love your reports because they're so simple as well. That's why I order them myself whenever I buy it, pretty much anywhere around Australia. Just the simplicity of it.
Yeah, it's a funny thing because I can't tell you how many people have rung me up and say, "Oh, Paul, you do inspections?" I go, "Yeah, we." I'm going to send you a report. Can you tell me what it says? I can't tell you how many people have sent a report from someone else, some other company, and they go, I don't know if it's good or if it's bad. And then I literally go through these reports and I actually can't. In one spot, it's all good. In another spot, there's something wrong. In another spot, and so just trying to have.
And some of the inspectors as well, rather than actually stating what an issue is, they just defer off everything. So it's like, you need to speak to a licensed plumber about this. You need to speak to an engineer about this. You need to speak to an electrician about this. It's like, so what knowledge are you actually bringing to this inspection other than scaring the buyer about needing all these other people?
It's such a good point because that is such a good point because that's what ends up happening is.
I see a lot of reports, Paul. I've seen over 80 over the last year. So
and this deferment and for me personally, one of the things that I found actually quite disappointing was no one makes a call. No one makes a call, Everyone's petrified about getting sued or making a mistake and no one makes a call, right? So they get into a house like, this is a common one, particularly if you look at inner suburbs in Perth, any location.
Anything that's got a bit of an older property, yeah.
Yeah, 1880s, 1920s. And, you have these inspectors that go in there and flag all these issues because they don't comply with current codes, with current building codes and standards. It's absurd, and actually the Australian standard, there's an Australian standard that we operate to for building inspections specifically excludes that for a very good reason. It's so tragic, it's like me, I've just bought a 1973 Fiat, right? So it's like me buying a 1973 Fiat and then bringing it to a mechanic who then looks at it and goes, "Oh, mate, this car's beautiful." But imagine going, "Oh, mate, the serious problems with this thing, the air gun, the suspension, like it's 1973. Can I drive it on the road? Is it safe? Will it get me to go? Yeah, we'll do all those things. But does it comply? Of course not, because it's an old vehicle. And the tragedy is with homes is that a house is a character, it's a building. It's got a bit of a character going on about it. It's housed all these families, they've come, they've gone. It's done its job, hasn't it? And people go, "Oh, it's a great house." And then you end up with some twit who comes along and goes, "Oh, the structure, the roof, there's a problem." And all of a sudden he was looking at the house like, "Oh, my God." Like the house now has been defamed. That's how I look at it. It's actually been, I can't tell you how many times I've had to go back to an inspection that I did years ago and they say, "Oh, there's major problems with the structure, major this, major that." And I turn up and go, "Where? Where are these?" And we seem to have lacked common sense. Here's a house, right? "Oh, this roof's a problem." Right. It was built in 1910. Correct. Right. It's 100 years old. Yes. It hasn't moved in 100 years. Correct. Okay, so tell me what's the problem? It's common sense, isn't it? If this thing's been around 100 years and it's still there, and we've had all sorts of things happen and it's still there, so I think that's the problem with particularly people looking at older homes, this compliance to, current codes. That's obviously, that shouldn't be something that you should be aware of it. Like, the roof, if you're putting in an aircon system or, like a hot water system or this or that, you need to be aware of those sorts of things. Yeah, you strengthen it. But the reality is that these homes get defamed. They've served their purpose. They've housed families. They've done this for a century, and all of a sudden there's a problem. And the only thing that's changed is someone's produced a paper report that says there's something wrong with this house. The house hasn't changed. It's the same house, And so that's actually something that's quite sad because they're, and it's probably not just in our industry. It's like people are so concerned about taking a risk or making a call that everyone sort of defers. Oh, go and see a plumber, go and see an electrician, if you go and see an engineer, I guaranteed that if you get an engineer to come and look at a house, you're never going to get an engineer. I'm an engineer. You're never getting an engineer to go and look at a house and go, this is perfect. Never. They're going to produce you're going to pay $1,000 for the pleasure, and you're going to end up a whole bunch of stuff telling you why this house doesn't comply with this, that, and the other. So, it's sad, it is really, really sad.
On that note, could you take us through the three categories, I guess, of findings and what things are typically classified under, and what do people actually need to be concerned about?
Yeah, look, in the code, it's really interesting, and we call it what we flag red,
That's why I like your reports. You're color-coded, quick look down, I can be like, yep, this is what I need to worry about.
Yeah, and look, the Australian standard's very clear about when something is red, when we should flag something as red. The first one is safety, right? Is there a safety issue, all right? And that can be that's very wide. Safety could be, you look out on the deck, it's 3 meters, no handrail, or the handrail's open and, kids can dive through it. Safety could be electrical cables hanging out the wall. Safety could be a structural issue, something that's looking a bit dodgy could be a structural issue. So safety is a big thing, and that's something that would definitely get flagged. And it might not be, the problem that we have is often, agents go, well, no, we're not looking for any of that stuff. We're just looking for structural defects. So in a way, it's sort of true, depending on the contract that's been written. I have a particular clause. In the book, I've got a particular clause that I always use when I buy property. I have a specific clause that I always use when I buy property, for the building, because the building inspector goes, vary. So I always have this clause that basically says that the report has to be to the buyer's full satisfaction, right? That's it. And there's in the book, this is the clause to use. I always use that clause because the problem is you could identify something that is an issue, but the contract might say only structural defects, and so then there might be other issues. So you want to have that ability to negotiate or to say, look, this needs to get sorted. So safety is a big one. That's the first thing. The second thing is anything that should do something but doesn't do it. So it's really simple, but something that should do something, but it's just not doing it. It's obvious, like there's an exhaust fan, it's not working. There's a hot plate, it's not working. I can't turn the aircon in, And so that also moves into the area of when you think about structural issues, like here's a beam that should be supporting that load. It's doing it, but it's right on the edge, So that's something that we need to identify. But something that should be doing something and it's not doing it, it's a defect. We would identify that as a defect. And the third thing is that if you don't do something about it, there's going to be further deterioration. It's going to cause more problems. A good example would be, cracked tile. People go, what's the drama with a cracked tile? Okay, it's a cracked tile. But it's not the cracked tile. If the cracked tile in it rains and the water gets in, falls on the ceiling, you have a ceiling issue. And, so anything that if you don't address will create problems downstream, And another example could be, water coming off the house, down pipes, on the foundations, you end up with excessive settlement, that type of stuff.
I was just out to a property this week that had foundational issues, and now they've got someone in, investigate it, tracked it back to not having soak wells outside. And, I see that in the reports commented all the time, and now I've seen the result.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think, so they're the things that we would, and look, structural issues are an obvious one, and I think that it is funny because, like we get in the roof on every inspection, we get under the floorboards, if it's possible, and we go on the roof. There's so many companies that won't do that. Oh, I can't go under the roof. You can't go on the roof. It's a safety issue. You can't climb around on the roof. No, it's safe. But I don't know how, I don't really get it. And the reason those areas are important, particularly inside the roof and the subfloor, is that's where, if you're going to have a structural issue, that's where they're going to be, Roof's not so much. You can tell from the roof. I mean, typically we'll always go in the roof and see if there's any issues with the structure. Yeah, you can see it. And so you can get up on the roof and have a look at if there's movement or there's waves. But typically structural issues, that's the two locations for them, And so you just got to get in, and you can't stand there at a manhole and go, look around the roof. I mean, there's just no chance, And the same with the subfloor, some of the subfloors are a little bit prohibitive because they're too low. They should have hatches there, but that's where you're more than likely to find any structural issues. And the other side of it, when you think about structural issues, is that they're not a problem. The only problem is that
buyers often freak out, and
they do. You would have seen that,
Almost one in every 3 or 4 houses I've sold have had roofing issues, but they're quite inexpensive to fix. And
really good example, like with roofing, but when you look at, for example, the structural issues, like unless it's major, like serious foundational issues, wall rotation, big, then it's obvious, and the house has probably been priced accordingly, right? I bought a property. It was with my daughter. Bought a property.
You like taking on the headaches, don't you?
I have these houses, I'm the one that smiles, and because I went out back of the house, and there I could put my hand through the wall with the crack. I'm like, well, this is fantastic, And the agent's like, oh, Paul, it's like, yeah, I'm going. And so no one, and that's where an opportunity lies. It's really interesting, right? So we look at these houses. I look at it, and I do a bit of an assessment and go, okay, let's have a look at it. Couldn't get offers on this house. Couldn't get offers. I mean, these are big cracks. Yeah, granted, it's sort of the old style house with a laundry hanging off the back. It's brick, but they're big cracks. They've sprayed foam and they've tried to close the gaps up.
Well, you'd be blown away how many buyers get upset by a little bit of cosmetic cracking on some corners. Is it, I'm getting some people freaking out on that. So you can fit your hand in it. That's going to be a whole different level.
I just love it. Because I knew, my daughter was young, so this was a cheaper property. I think we ended up buying the property for less than land value because, the house was almost a freebie, really. And, that's been, and they go, the thing to keep in mind, though, this is important, that when you buy a property that's got some obvious stuff like that going on, the banks get a bit twitchy in the sense that they want to see an inspection report, And so that can be where, fortunately, I knew a good inspector, so it wasn't too bad for us. So anyway, we did the inspection. Well, we identified it correctly, but it wasn't really an issue. And those sorts of things, then there's an opportunity because most people will, young couple, parents in there, and cracks and walls and this and that. Like, it's been there, I think that's been 2 years and we didn't do anything to it. Like, fill the cracks. And we do, all I suggest is you do a crack monitoring regime, which is really easy. It's not that complicated. You go, there's a crack through here, you put a pencil mark on this one, you put a pencil mark over here, or a pen mark, and you measure it. It's, between the dots, so you might say it's, 25 mil now. And then you just come back every 3 months and measure it, Oh, it hasn't moved. And then you measure it and it hasn't moved, So then, actually it's not moving anymore. It's done.
You don't have to take action straight away, on that particular one.
You don't have to spend $20,000 doing something with the foundations because it's done. It's not moving anymore. So I think that aspect of it, where cracks are an obvious thing, but by the standard, it's actually really interesting when you identify, people would be pretty horrified to know that before a crack is identified as a serious structural crack, it's got to be almost 20 millimeters, so, airline cracks, nothing, 1-2 millimeters, nothing, so they're not deemed, structurally significant at all, but visually, that's obvious, isn't it? People see a crack, and there's always a story behind a crack, why is it here? And it's always good to, why, trying to understand what's caused that. But typically, giving away the purchasing of a property over a structural issue like that, it's just sad because it's not necessary. And particularly if it's identified and the owners, the seller's got to fix it anyway. So what do you care? Just take the cash off and deal with it yourself, So
I guess it all comes down to context, doesn't it? And that's why you're, being satisfied with the whole report is particularly important, because if that's the only one thing and you've quantified it, you've understand it, okay, it's not that big a deal. But if I guess you've got many, many things all adding up that you didn't originally realize, all of a sudden you're at 40 grand, 30 grand, you got to decide what you can live with and what needs to be addressed, and what's the actual underlying change to the value that you might have paid for it.
Yes. That's a good point. And I think as you made the point before, if it's an investment property, you got to deal with these things, like if you're moving it yourself, you go, okay, that's leaning a bit and I can live with that. And those doors are a bit rattly and you can't really do that with tenants. For us, tenants are clients, they're clients, So you tend to have to spend more money. I find that when I'm buying an investment property, you need to get it right. Well, I might buy it for myself and go, it's always the adage, when are you going to fix that on the back? I'm like, oh, okay.
The classic, a building inspector never might get around to doing his own place, like the plumber doesn't fix his own toilets.
Carriage get munched by termites, people laugh, it's like, did you go, oh yeah, I wasn't onto that, it's like far out, but it's, and that's probably a good thing for people to take away is that, we don't live in a country where, our building standards are pretty high. And in essence, in fact, older properties, look, not always, but typically older properties are just built better, They're just built, we can have times around the war when there was a shortage of materials and, in the history of construction booms, like we've had recently, there's always this lag effect of crappy.
Well, that's where a lot of these issues are coming up that you'd think,
Yeah. And so it's when we happen to have a lack of brickies or a lack of this or a lack of that.
Getting your dampness issues and your other things that just haven't clearly been done correctly, yeah.
That's right. And so, look, they're all, you can deal with that stuff. And as we know, the value of property primarily is land, then that's really, the location and land.
Yeah, buildings depreciate and land appreciates, and yeah,
exactly right. So
I guess in your space, is there any technology that you guys are using to help identify things, or what's your kind of go-tos on that front? Is there anything exciting on the horizon? We're going to send robots into, drones in your roof or something?
Yeah, look, it's. I'm a bit of a tech head. I do like technology, but over the years, I kept looking at stuff and just go, it's just.
Yeah, is it really going to, produce a better result? And
what it does is it makes people go, wow, and you can use it in marketing. So an example would be infrared cameras, these infrared cameras, right? You point them at the wall and, all they do is determine.
You take a cool photo of yourself in the mirror.
Yeah, they do all sorts of fantastic. And so the guys go, oh, this guy's offering like an infrared camera. I'm like, right, okay. So I look at that and go, is it a useful tool? Sure. The only thing is you have to point it, it's not like if I don't point it at that wall, it's not of any use, So I've either got to run around and point it and squirt it and, take shots of every single wall, which is ridiculous. If you've got, if you see a bit of a leak, for example, something leaking outside, I want to see if there's excess moisture, you can identify that. But, a moisture meter does that. We use moisture meters to identify moisture, in places. There are tools, but primarily and the guys talk about drones for the roof. I'm like, yeah, like there's no substitute for me. Walk on the roof, unless if you can't get on the roof, then the boys will move the ladder around with binoculars and have a look. But, I've got a drone and I'll go over but there's no substitute. Like you can touch things, you can feel things, you can go, oh, hang on, there's a bit of a lip here. There's just actually no substitute for, looking at it and getting on it. So because I often got tempted, I just go to China and they'll have, cameras that you can jam down drains and they got the things that crawl and, but, I really subscribe to that. Is it going to make it better for the client? Is it going to, identify something that we wouldn't have identified, and, over 80,000 inspections, we've pretty much worked out that we don't really miss much. It's very rare that we miss anything, and so I don't see there's a need there. It's like, is there a need? I'm like, and maybe some of the things that, I talk a little bit about it in the book, which it's gone off the boil a little bit, a bit about the, how efficient, particularly with how efficient is the house. You don't get a sticker on it, with it, which is a tragedy. And you buy a fridge, you buy a washing machine, you buy everything. It's got a star rating. You buy a car, it tells you, litres per 100 Ks. You buy a house, you got no clue. And so what is it going to be like for your tenants if you're renting it out? What's it going to be like for you, And they're basic things. So we do identify those things like insulation, being aware of that. Is there ceiling fans in there which can really help doing cooling? Can you get cross flow through it? These sorts of things that don't necessarily, like the old storage hot water systems, they're just insane. I think they're pretty much banned now, but they still exist in the older homes. And they're like, people go, is that a bad thing? It's like an urn. It's like having a 300-litre urn that is on all the time, boiling water. I mean, it's just insane, the power of those things. And I used to do sustainability assessments, and you go in and people go, oh, look at my power bill. And you just point to that thing. And the bottom line was, if you have something that's, how do I know if it's inefficient? If you got something that's generating heat and it's not a heater, it's inefficient. That's pretty simple, So, well, you remember those old halogen lights? You go, you can scorch your arm on it.
Yeah, see the steam off them. Yes.
Yeah, and so, inefficient. These hot water systems emitting heat, So there's a lot of, that's another thing to take into account, is it's not necessarily.
I think it's definitely a consciousness around it now. And
how do you find it? Do you find that, Jared? Do you find people a little bit more?
The occasional, yeah. But I think you can sort of fast forward 10, 20 years and it's going to be far more important as energy prices keep going up and people become more aware of these things. So,
yeah. And you notice that if you travel around a bit, we've been traveling around Europe, like our homes are around. Like I'm in a home here and, there's two sets of windows. This home's got to be, 50 years old. There's two sets of windows. There's an outside window and an inside window, and there's shutters on the outside, because it's, this place here gets down to, negative, it can get negative 20 during winter. So, gas and heating cost is huge. So there's more attention on that side of things, and I think, whilst we can just go, I'll just click a button and, turn the aircon on, that's great. But sometimes there's things to be aware of with a property that don't cost a lot of money, that can make a bit of a difference in relation to the running costs. Or you don't really have that. I wish someone would come up with that, like this house, what's the running costs for a house? If this house was used.
That'd be cool. X dollars per annum for, typical use.
Yeah, and you've got all sorts of things you can change easily, convert, water fittings, showers and this and that to reduce your water flow and stuff. Hot water systems, expensive, can be an issue. There's a big move towards solar now. Obviously, a lot of homes have solar, which is a good thing. The downside is, we don't get any money. Certainly in WA, we don't get any money for putting money back in the grid. It's immaterial, but it's just something else to be conscious of, and just because they're solar panels, we've seen this so many times, they're not connected or they've been just, it's so funny, like we go down to the thing and goes, there's no oh, no, it's got solar panels. And no, something's died. The inverter's crapped itself because they've been around for many years now. If you think about it, probably I remember putting solar panels on one of the houses probably about 20 years ago now when they were just coming. It was $8,000 for a 1 kilowatt system. $8,000 for a 1 kilowatt system. And the government was giving $7,000 grants.
Okay. Well, yeah, the early adopters do get benefits of the grants, even though the cost is pretty high.
They did, and we used to get, I think it was like 25 or 30 cents.
Feeding back,
But these systems now have not come to the end of life, but they're not as efficient as they used to be. And sometimes the electrician's gone in and unplugged something. So there's a family going, oh, no, it's great. We've got solar. Oh, it's great. And not actually doing anything, so they just can't make those assumptions. That's why don't inspect.
Well, we'll put a link to your book in the show notes.
Yeah.
I know there's so much other content in there that we could cover off some other time, so we might look to have you back when you're Perth side, but stay in touch and thank you so much for your time today, mate.
No worries, Jared. Enjoy chatting. Always enjoy chatting about property.
Just a reminder, the information discussed in this podcast is general in nature. As we don't know your specific situation, you should always seek professional advice before taking any action. For free market reports on your suburbs of interest and other helpful resources to grow your wealth, make sure you join my property investor update at investorsedge.com.au/join. And finally, make sure you're a member of our Perth Property Investment Facebook group to be part of the conversation with other like-minded investors, get help to your questions, and get a feel for what's going on out there in the market. I'll see you in the group.